Again, as mentioned, I will be starting by showing you some of my design process, and then I will go on to show the ceramic part. I always like to start with a little introduction video of my daily workflow, so let's start with that. Just a quick video, so you have an idea what I will be showing. So just a quick insight. So as you can see, I like to design my case, or I do my cases from start to finish. So from the design to the finalization. I like doing that to have full control. And so for me, that's a really important part. So let's start. So with the all in X cases, I'm applying I call it the dream team. So the combination of the titanium bar directly screwed into the multi-unit usually, and the zirconia sleeve on top. So why do I call it the dream team? Because so for me, the zirconia is like the superhero, so the star, and then we have the supporting character underneath. So that's our titanium bar. You can imagine it like Batman and Robin. So we have the star on top and the supporting character, which is of course as important underneath. So let's start with a little case. So I will be showing real cases now. I don't like to show just show models. So we'll be seeing a real case now. So from start to finish. So that's how the patient came in. We can see we have some problems with the aesthetic, and also these were removable or like full dentures, and the patient wanted something more fixed, more stable. So it was decided to place implants in the upper and lower jaw to replace these acrylic dentures. So that's the planning. That's just a quick video the dentist sent me, so he does all the planning himself. Before this stage, if we don't have like a working denture, I usually do a digital setup just to see where the optimal implant position would be later on. So I sent the STL of my digital design to the dentist. He can import it into his planning software and use that information to plan the implant position. But in this case, that was not needed because we had some like dentures. Of course, they're not perfect, but good enough for the planning stage. So right after surgery, we did immediate temporary. So just something quick So the patient goes out with fixed teeth after the surgery. So on the lower jaw, we could use the denture, the existing denture. We just made some space for the healing caps. And in the upper jaw, there was too much change on the bone and tissue situation. So we needed to come up with this different situation. So we just did a quick provisional temporary. So that's the temporary in situation. Of course, we can see the occlusion and the aesthetics are not perfect, but that's just provisional 2 hours after surgery, so that's acceptable, I believe. Again, we can see we have to do some improvements in the aesthetic region as well. So they're way too short because we had a lot of bone reduction, so now we need to compensate for that in the final case. And now that I have the temporary, we can use the temporary actually to scan the implant position. So that's a system we like to use when we have an immediate temporary. We use the reverse scan body technique. Why? Because we did the pickup of the temporary in situation, so we can, or we know that the implant position is correct because it was picked up directly in the mouth. We can check the passivity by using the temporary. We can even do the Sheffield test. And once we make sure that the temporary has a perfect implant position, we can screw some special scan bodies on there. So they have a reverse connection. That's why it's called reverse scan body technique. And we use that as our scan body scan. So that's a great alternative if you don't have photogrammetry, for example, because we all know intraoral scan on soft tissue never is precise. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. So we screw them in, scan them with the intraoral scanner. So, I mean, most of my dentists are far away, so I ship everything to them. So I never see the dentist, the patient. So we need to come up with a safe, reliable workflow, and also a workflow without shipping anything to me to the lab. So that's the digitized version of the temporary. And just a quick video again about the planning and matching of the temporary and some surgery. So as you can see, we match the scan of the reverse scan bodies onto the initial design of the temporary. So we have now at this stage already our final implant position which we can use and for the final design. The only thing extra we need is, of course, the new bite situation, so just a occlusal scan, and of the new soft tissue situation. So this stage we did after about 4 months of healing. So now we have a new tissue situation, we need of course a scan of that, and the new bite situation. So again, the matching of the reverse scan body, so it's just it's the same as a usual scan body scan, just the other way around. So, and now this steps has three purposes. So once it's my scan of the situation, we can do adjustments in situation of the occlusion. I can adapt them into the final design. I have my passive fit implant position, and also I can check the passivity of the implants with that. So it's also my verification check in just one step. So 3 steps in one. So really efficient. Then I go on and import it into my design software. So I use ExoCAD. That's after the implant matching. In the lower jaw, we used a different implant system, so that technique was not possible. So we needed to mill a verification jig and verify the implant position later again during the try-in. Okay, so a lot of people are skeptical of the full arch workflow in the digital age, because they're saying we cannot do the model analysis digitally. But there are some ways. Of course, it's not as straightforward as the manual way, but we can import planes, we can import different tools. So there's always a workaround. So I start by creating a visualization plane, which I position on the skeletal midline, just to have a starting point. And then the second thing we need is the occlusal plane, because we are doing a double full arch case, so we need to create a new occlusal plane. So just a quick video of how I get to that point. Again, I import a new plane, and then I select some 2 points on the distal side, which are called hamuli, and the point just next to the papilla incisiva. And now I have my basic inclination of the occlusion plane. The next thing is I have to bring the occlusion plane up and align it onto the bipupillar line. So, so the aesthetics are great as well. So let's do that quick. Just align it onto the facial analysis I did before. So now I have the inclination from the lateral side and from the frontal side. And now I just have to bring it down to the optimal height. I mean, that's just a starting point from now, and later on I will adjust it depending on what I see during the setup. But that's my occlusion plane. So as you can see, it looks really steep, but later on you will see it's spot on. So again, the facial analysis. So that's just the standard analysis included in ExoCAD. And my 2 planes visualized. And then to get to the length of the centros, we can create some lines going on from the outer side of the eye and through the outer point of the nose. And usually, so in, let's say, in 80% of the cases, you get a really nice length of the centros. So it looks really harmonic, because we need to create teeth fitting the patient's face, not just teeth on a model, right? So I always need the patient's photo, different photos of the smile line, of the retracted face, so I have all the information available I need. And again, in 80% of the cases, that works, but why not 100%? Because our faces are not symmetrical. So some patients have really asymmetrical faces, and we cannot achieve that. but usually it's again a good starting point. And now to see the harmony between the centrus and the laterals, I use the nasal profile of the patient. So depending on how sharp the nasal angle is, I create, so if it's a sharper angle, I create the centrus longer and the laterals shorter. But if we have a really flat angle, so as in this case, they're almost on the same level. I can just bring that down to visualize it so we can see it's not a big difference between the centrus and the laterals, but it looks really harmonious. And now for the tooth setup, I use the system by Professor Korkhaus. So it's a system where I measure the distance between the molar position, sort of the first molars, and then I know the distance, the optimal distance between the two premolars, and from there the distance to the anteriors. So it's a really great system. So if you just have one value of them three, you know the distance of the other 2 points. Usually it's an analog system, so you have to measure it analog, but I created a tool to import an exocad or even 3Shape, which I use for all my setups. Just a quick view how that looks. And that's my final model analysis, completely digitally. So I have my occlusal plane, my midline, and the guide for my tooth positioning. So I know exactly how much forward I need to place the anteriors, because that's always a big problem I see, especially on social media. A lot of people, they don't know where to place the centrals or the anteriors, because usually these patients have a lot of bone loss, a lot of information is missing, and yeah, so we have too many variables. So I try to always analyze everything before starting the case, because I don't want to have any surprises at the end. I don't want to repeat cases. And yet it's a big problem. A lot of people, when you ask them, why did you set up the teeth there? They cannot give you an answer because they don't know. So for me, the analysis is like the most important thing. Again, to don't have any surprises at the end. Also, a really nice tool is having a facial scan. I don't need a complete facial scan when I have the patient's photo. It's just enough to have a facial scan of the labial and nasal area. You can do that with any intraoral scanner. So in this case, it was scanned by using the Medit scanner. They have their own module for that, but all scanners can do that. Maybe you just have to use some tricks. Just scan it as an additional scan, pre-op scan, and export it like that. But usually all scanners can do that. And that's really important as well, just to see the labial volume. So we can see here, I can see exactly the labial volume in relation to my setup. Again, another view. So that's a really important thing. Also to see like a three-dimensional smile line or the labial profile, not just in a photo, because photos are only two-dimensional. And if I turn it a bit, it's already off. So I always prefer to have a facial scan, even if it's just a little one as here in this case, but it helps a lot. Again, the setup in relation to the planes I created earlier, so that we can see the midline, the midplane, and we can see that I set up the teeth in relation to the occlusal plane I created. That's the final setup in digitally with the patient's photo overlaid. Looks nice, harmonious. But the problem is when showing that to the patient, they cannot imagine how it will look in their face, because the photo is in color, the teeth are gray, or even sometimes in exocad green or even yellow. And we always forget the patients are not seeing that every day, so they cannot imagine that in their own face. So we have to help them a bit. So what I do is I turn the design into a grayscale, and then I can send that to my dentist, and he can show that to the patient, so just in a grayscale, and it's a lot better for the patient to imagine that. Also during this design, just a little tip, if you're using the digital workflow, just go to your Windows settings and you will find some option in accessibility which is called color filters, and there you can activate the grayscale, and there's a hotkey which you can activate and deactivate at any time during the design. So often during my setup, I just turn my whole screen into a grayscale just to remove any distractions of color. So my whole focus is on the aesthetics, the symmetry, the form and shape of the teeth, and I don't have any distractions of different colors. So that's how it looks like later with the filter on, and that is something the patient can imagine. Also in the new Exocad version, we have AI visualization. So the AI is calculating the setup into the patient's face and looks really realistic. But just for a quick setup, I usually do it like that, and that helps a lot. Because at the end, the patient has to approve of the design, not the dentist, not me. The patient has to be happy with their new teeth. Okay, so that's the final design. Now we go on to the prototype stage. So I will print them and send them to the dentist, or I will send the STL to my dentist and he prints them in-house. Again, we can see the occlusal relation. So in cases like that, or generally, it's really important that we only place contact points on convex surfaces. Because if we place contact points on concave surfaces, the patient will be swimming around because there's no stable occlusion. So to ensure a stable occlusion, we need convex contact points. And again, I check every part of the teeth, all the teeth in the cut view, as you can see on the right, and I can see exactly where my contact points are. You can see they are on concave surfaces. Sometimes when you're just creating one arch, so the opposing is already existing and you cannot do an optimal occlusion, sometimes it's necessary to create some artificial convex surfaces. So it's like sometimes it looks like a backpack on the side of the cusp, for example, but that's necessary to have a stable occlusion. That's the basal area. Everything nice, convex and hygienic. Also, that's a big problem I see often, that they just wrap it around the patient's bone, and it cannot be cleaned. So especially when having patients like that, they're usually a bit older, not that mobile anymore. We have to help them with the hygiene, the cleaning process. So we have to create everything nice, convex, and basically self-cleaning. We cannot create any food traps because that will lead to infections, and the patient could lose their implants. So everything nice and smooth, even if the implant is, or the multi-unit connection is visible sometimes, but that's a sacrifice we have to make. But usually that's not a problem because the implant position is below the smile line, so usually it's never possible and never visible. You can only see it on the retracted photos and not in the natural smile. So as I mentioned, we go on and print that to create our prototypes. We try them in. We can see it looks good already, but we have to make some adjustments on the occlusion. So we can see the left side is a bit open and we have to adjust that. So again, at this stage, we can make any adjustments in situations. So adjust the occlusion by grinding and take a new new scan of the prototype, so in occlusion, so I can adjust the new bite in my final design. As I mentioned, in the lower jaw, we did not use the reverse gum body technique, so that's why we need a verification jig. I milled a verification jig in transparent PMMA. I make it really thick so it does not flex. And it's based on the exact same implant position I used during the design. So I'm making sure that I don't have a different situation. Because if you do a manual verification jig, you have a different situation than you design. So I use the exact same position from design to create the verification jig. Again, I made it from clear PMMA. You can never print verification jigs because printed materials are not stable. They're flexing, they're distorting, and we don't have the control of the passivity. That's the jig in situation. You can see here we have a great passivity. If the passivity is off, we have to separate the jig and reconnect it in situation. Then I have to create or I have to screw in the lab analogs, the model analogs, and create just a plaster base, put some scan bodies on there, and scan it in a lab scanner, in a table scanner, because that's a lot more precise than a intraoral scanner. And then I can transfer that position into my design, match it, and I have the perfect passivity again. So again, that's the prototype. You can see that the left side is a bit off. Also, the centers look a bit canted, so we will be fixing that now. So I get my scans back, I adjust the design, and now after doing all the adjustments, I can go on and finalize my design. So that means separating the bar from my main structure. To separate the bar, I use a software called Blender for Dental, which is a really quick way and efficient way to do that. You can do it, of course, also in Exocad, but you have to do basically 3 extra steps. And also I noticed that the fit is not that great. So if you do it in Blender, I noticed that the fit is way better. Why? Because we don't have to calculate the structure on top of the bar again. We're just cutting the bar out of the design with a thin layer in between, and that ensures a perfect fit basically every time. Just a quick video how that works. And also the big advantage is that we do a reverse planning. So we are planning the bar into the final design, not the other way around, because if you're creating the bar and then creating your design on top of that, you have to adjust your design to the bar. And now we have the advantage that we adjust the bar to our final design, and we are not modifying the final design. So you can see I have my bar separated from the design. And for minimal thickness, how much do we need? Usually, so in general, I try to be above 1 millimeter of minimal thickness, usually more. But I also try to make the bar as big as possible. Why? Because the zirconia is really heavy and the titanium is really light, so I want to take advantage of that and bring down the overall weight of the structure. Also for the minimal thickness, usually 1 millimeter is enough because I'm using the strongest zirconia possible for that. So I mill them in the VITA ST zirconia and not the XT. Why? Even though we have the bar, we need the strength of the structure itself. We cannot use the soft high translucent zirconia. We need a strong base. So I milled it in the ST multi-layer zirconia. I always use multi-layer because I don't want to paint too much. I already want the final color in my base. So I just have to do some characterization of the effects, not the color itself. Again, the bar design visualized. You can see we have really big bars, make them as big as possible to have strength and to bring down the weight. And also if you use the strongest zirconia, which is usually a bit more opaque, you don't have problems with graying because of the bar. And also when it's an FP3 case like that, so with gingiva, we will be layering pretty opaque gingiva paste onto the thin part of the bar, so it does not shine through. If you have an FP1 case, so only teeth, you might want to make the bar a bit smaller in the anterior region to avoid graying. So then we mill everything. So the titanium bars, the direct multi-unit connection, and the zirconia sleeve on top. And for the fit, I want a completely passive fit. I don't want to have any tension because that can lead to fractures in the zirconia. So if you turn the structure around, the bar has to fall out. It cannot hold in there. It has to fall out. Absolutely no friction in there. And also in the bar design, I round everything off. So I don't want to have any sharp corners on zirconia or on ceramic in general. I do everything usually monolithically. Why? Because I'm planning my function already perfectly in my design phase, so I don't want to manipulate it later on manually, because I never get the same perfect function again. Also, a big critic point is that a lot of people still have in mind that zirconia is too abrasive, too hard for the natural antagonist, but there are some studies showing that's just not true. So here, for example, we have a study comparing feldspar ceramics with monolithic zirconia, and we can see that the zirconia actually has or is causing less abrasion to the natural enamel than the feldspar ceramics. Even though when talking about hand layered feldspar ceramics, we are talking about 50 megapascal, and with the high strength zirconia, we're talking 1200 megapascal. So it's multiple times more harder, but we have less abrasion. Why? Because we have a dense surface. So when using ceramics, so feldspar ceramics, after some time in the mouth, they just get ground down. We might have a polished surface, a nice and smooth glazed surface, but after the abrasion, there's a really rough surface underneath. And with the zirconia, we don't have that. And we can bring it down even more if we polish the zirconia. So that's the comparison to the sandblasted and just glazed zirconia and just high polished zirconia. So high polished zirconia has, again, less abrasion because it's really hard. It does not get abraded by the antagonist. So when they so we always have a nice dense and smooth surface. But for the aesthetic reasons, I don't like to just polish the zirconia. I like to stain it and glaze it. So I do something in the middle between the both options. So I don't sandblast it. I pre-polish it and then stain and glaze my polished zirconia. So when the contact points are worn down after some time in the mouth, I have a highly polished surface underneath and basically no abrasion. Of course, I have abrasion, but in comparison, I have way less abrasion than sandblasted zirconia or layered zirconia. So for polishing, I use these tools. So it's a three-step process. I start with the more coarse ones, then I go on to polish with the finer wheels, and then I just use some polishing paste, ceramic diamond polishing paste, and a hard brush to give it a high gloss. So now we go on to the characterization. So for the staining, I like to use the Accent Plus stains. They work really well on everything ceramic. Nice strong colors. So I really like them because they have really intense colors. So if, for example, with other staining systems, the colors are really muted. So you have to use a lot of color and may be needing multiple bakes because you will lose the details. And when using really intense stains, you can use less color. They're not running into each other and they stay fixed. They keep their intensity, and I can do it in just one bake. So on the gingival area, so I'm always starting with the gingival area if I have to do both. I just do some internal staining, give it a basic pink color with the ES8, which is a light pink. I just cover the whole structure with that. And then on the mucosal part, if I have it, and incidental parts, I use some ES9, which is a brownish reddish tone, just to give it some depth. And on the roots, I use some ES4, which is a yellow orange tone, just to simulate the roots shining through. And then for layering, I like to use the Lumix AC ceramics. I tried different ceramics also from other big brands, but I always come back to these because they have a really minimal contraction. So I use some other big brand ceramics and they contract a lot. So I cannot do everything in one bake. So I usually need an extra bake, some corrections. But with these, because they almost don't contract, I do everything in just one bake. And that's like a big advantage for me, especially when I have to do multiple bars a day. So after the staining of the gingival area, I just sprinkle some pink ceramics on there, which will be serving as my wash bake at the same time. Usually I just use the rosewood, which is a nice middle tone. It's not too dark, not too bright. And again, gives me a nice pinkish tone underneath as well. So I just sprinkle it on top, blow off the excess. So you have to make sure that you don't stain onto the teeth before, or don't wet the teeth because it will be sticking there, of course. So try to keep the teeth as dry as possible during that stage. And now, after removing the excess, I can go on and stain my teeth. So I'm doing the staining of my teeth. I mean, depends on the case. Usually I don't do that many effects because these patients want a nice, bright Hollywood smile, maybe just some transparency with some ES12, which is a bluish tone, or some purple tone. So I usually just use these. And I always do some pink around the cervical part. Why? Because the natural enamel is transmitting the light from the gingiva, so the gingival color, into the tooth. And of course, the zirconia does not do that, so we have to emulate that by just bringing some pink on the cervical part. And that gives us a really nice integration later on, because we have a really nice smooth transition between the gingiva and the teeth. So that's just a basic scheme of my coloring. We can do some crack lines as well. I already paint the halo on that stage and the transparency. So everything I want to see later on, I'm painting in that stage. So sometimes, so in this case, we have a minimal cutback of 0.3 millimeters. But even if I do it monolithically, I do it exactly the same. Just when doing the cutback, you have to paint it a bit more intense because the ceramics are absorbing a bit of the color. So that's my first firing. So my first firing includes the internal staining of the gingiva, wash of the gingiva, and staining or internal staining of the teeth. So everything in one bake. I bake it really high to to have a nice connection between the framework and the ceramics. So that's my wash. I bake it for 850 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes to have a really nice connection. And you can see even though I baked it really high, the colors still have the same intensity. So you don't have to worry about that because with other stains, sometimes you're losing intensity. That's not really the case here. So then I do my ceramic buildup of just the gingiva, or in this case also the teeth. Everything in one step again. And for that, I also really keep it really simple. I just use 3 colors on the gingiva. So I start by using some deep red in the mucosal part, maybe some interdental triangles. And then to create a transition from there, I just use a deep red and enamel clear mix to create a transition between the darker areas and the lighter areas. Then my main build-up color will be the purple and enamel clear. And I mean, it depends on the case. So usually I switch between the rosewood and purple. So the rosewood has a more reddish tone, and the purple, of course, is more purple. Depends on the gingival color of the patient, so you have to check that. But usually I just switch them out if I see I have a more reddish tone. And then for the area around the teeth and the papilla areas, I use a nectarine and enamel clear mix. So as you can see, I mix everything with clear ceramics because I did an internal staining and I want that to show through a bit. So I have a basic deep color underneath, and yeah, so that's why I need to mix it with the clear ceramics. I keep it again really simple, just 50-50, one part pink, one part clear. And also make sure that you use clear because clear does not have fluorescence. Of course, we don't want to have any fluorescence in the gingival area. And for the teeth, I keep it really simple as well. Just one color because I did my coloring and all my effects already below that. So I just use some opal neutral and enamel clear mix. Again, 1:1 ratio. So really simple because I don't want to use too many powders. I like to paint everything and just use a minimal amount of powders later on to streamline my process. That's my second firing. Then I do some, so that's directly after the firing, that how it turns out. So you can see all the effects are shining through really nice. Also the ginger looks nice, organic. Then I do just some grinding, adjust the shape of the teeth, add some texture. And then I add some glaze if needed and fire that again. Usually, as you can see, I close up the interdental areas a bit with the glaze just to make it more hygienic. So in cases like that, the hygienic part is more important than the aesthetic part. That's the reality because these patients are not that mobile and we have to help them. So I just close up the interdental areas a bit. So I add some glaze there. And depending on the patient, I glaze the gingiva or leave it like that because if I bake it at the glaze temperature, it's basically self-glazing. Also, when having a big structure like that, make sure that you rise raise the temperature enough because the zirconia structure is absorbing a lot of heat. So I believe the standard temperature for the first ceramic bake is 760 degrees, but I bake it at 772 degrees, so 12 degrees higher, because the zirconia is absorbing a lot of heat. Also, when you have a massive zirconia structure, so without the bar, you have to raise it even more to compensate for that. And we can check the color again at the end. We can see we have the same color as we had during the internal staining. So in this case, we did it a bit different. So that's the case of the patient before now again. Just we kept the teeth monolithic, and I added some pink on the gingival part. And in the lower jaw, because the doctor told me that the bite position is not that secure at the moment, so he has some doubt. So that's why we decided to put a PMMA structure, a mill PMMA structure on top of the bar, just as a, like, let's say a ultra long term temporary. And then when everything is stable or we want to upgrade it to zirconia, that's no problem. I just mill the file again in zirconia, finish it, and yeah, fix it onto the bar. So I have to get the denture back, separate the PMMA from the bar, and cement the bar again, and that's it. Because we already planned the occlusion, we planned the aesthetics, we have the passivity because of the bar. So I just have to cement it in the bar, and we are ready to go. So it's also a really nice option if you want to do an upgrade later on. So maybe you decide to do it in PMA for cost reasons before, and when the patient has enough money, we can upgrade to zirconia later on without any problem. So we don't need any try-in again. We just can go straight to the finish case. And if you did everything right, that's all the dentist has to do. Just screw it in, close up the holes, the screw channels, and the patient is ready to go home. As you can see, we have a nice, perfect occlusion. And it looks really nice, nicely integrated. We cannot see any gray, at least on the zirconia. On the PMA, it might look gray because PMA is really translucent, so you might want to opaque the bar. Again, we can see the bite, the occlusion. As we see now, the patient is still searching a bit for the bite, but if you do cases like that, that's a normal thing. So after 1 or 2 days, the patient gets used to the new bite position, and the patient will find their bite every time after that. So that's just maybe on the first day, and after that we don't have that problem anymore, because the patients are just not used to the position, and they need some time basically. Okay, just another case, this time zirconia lower, again monolithic zirconia in the teeth and some reduction on the gingival part for some pink ceramics. After sintering, you can see the fit of the bar, so that's the fit I get out of the blender design. So we have a perfect fit. Just some adjustments of the texture and tooth shape. That's just that structure you can see. I pre-polished the zirconia before staining, also on the anterior region because we have contact points there in the lower jaw. So I pre-polish it, and also it looks if you're working monolithically, it looks nicer because we have some light reflection from underneath, and it gives so in my opinion, gives us a bit more depth, as when the transparent, the opaque structure is absorbing all the light. We can, yeah, by polishing the surface, we create some reflection and we have some more depth. Again, the internal staining on the gingiva, the sprinkling of the powder on the gingival part, removing the excess, and staining the teeth. So I already have the teeth stained there after applying the powder on the gingiva. All the effects are just painted on monolithically. First firing. Again, same technique every time. And that's after the firing. Again, 850 degrees for 2 minutes to have a nice connection between the ceramics and the framework. And you can see the intensity of the stains is still there. So now I can start by doing my build-up. So again, we can see the deep red here and the purple. Now finish off the shape by using the nectarine and clear mix, adding some texture. But the texture really depends on the patient. So usually I keep the texture really light just to make it more hygienic. So that's my second bake after the ceramic build-up. That's straight out of the furnace. So you can see we have basically the exact same anatomy as I laid before. So we have almost no shrinkage, and I can do everything in just one ceramic build-up bake. So now I glaze, and that's after glazing. So when working monolithically, of course I have to glaze the teeth. And as I mentioned before, usually I don't glaze the gingiva because it's basically self-glazing. Just in this case, I decided together with the doctor that I glazed the gingiva as well, just to make it more hygienic because the patient is not that mobile and we need more hygiene. So I glazed everything just to make it more hygienic. You can see it here, everything nicely glazed, everything nice and smooth. But it really depends on the patient, how mobile the patient is and how much oral hygiene the patient has. Just the last case, I want to show the case because it shows how nice the monolithic zirconia can be. So that's the initial situation with the chairside provisional and temporary. I believe this was a converted denture, converted chairside by the dentist. So we have the full upper all on X case and 2 posterior crowns and a posterior bridge in the lower jaw. So again, that's the final design. After designing, I always check again the function. So I always use the digital articulator. I do all my function already in the design, or I use other options like Zebras or Mojo if I have the data available. So that's the initial design, which we will be printing now to use it in the prototype stage. Again, I check the occlusion also on the cut view. Everything nice and concave on the basal area. And now we have our prototype. So in this case, because the dentist has no printer, we had to produce it in the lab. But we had some problems in the past because the prototype had some distortions, so we decided to just mill it in wax. and send that off to the dentist. You can see that's what the dentist sent me back. Just some aesthetic changes, just some small changes. The anterior is a bit bigger, a bit longer, but now you can see on the occlusion um, we didn't have to do any changes because it came out perfectly already in the prototype stage, because the chairside provisional or temporary was already had a really good occlusion. So I don't like to use the wax rims because they're never precise. The patient is always swimming around, always searching, and usually the patients already they have some a denture or something. So if possible, I would always use the existing restoration for the bite, even if it's a bad one, but it's always better than the wax rim. So we can see the try-in. Looks pretty nice. Again, we have to do the adjustments of the anterior shape as we saw before. I do that, and now I can finalize my design. So I separate the bar, mill the zirconia, mill the titanium bar, and for the reduction, in this case we kept it monolithically in the on the teeth, and on the gingival part I just did a 0.7 millimeter reduction, and I layered it by using the same technique as I showed in the other cases before. So you can see a cut view with a really thin layer on the gingiva, the same thickness all the way through, and that's the final case in situation. So monolithic teeth looks really nice, and yeah, especially when we have a full arch case like that, we don't need to layer the teeth because we're replacing everything, and we are not doing a central matching, for example. So usually I just do them monolithically, and everyone is happy because we don't have the risk of chipping, we don't have the risk of fractures, and yeah, it's nice, opaque. The patients want that. In this case, I kept it a bit more natural, so I added some more transparency with some stains, some mamelons, and especially when we turn it now into a grayscale, we can see the value of the zirconia and the staining is perfect. So it fits exactly the existing dentition the patient has. Also, you can see a really nice gingival tone, so it's we have the same the same opaqueness and same value again in the gingival part as the natural gingiva. And that's how we change the patient's life by changing their teeth. So that's the before. And you can see the big difference afterwards. So for me, it's always incredible to see this big change in the patient. So we change their whole life, their whole attitude. So it's always like a emotional moment for all included. Okay, yeah, that was a lot of information. I hope you learned something. And yeah, if you want to see more, I post a lot on social media, so Instagram, you can search me there. If you want to see some like, daily cases, and also on my website, you can find some more informations or some publications I wrote. And yeah, so that's it. So thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Lucas. That was a great webinar there. Very insightful. I feel like I even learned a lot there. So if I learn a lot, I'm sure everyone else has. Awesome. So I will continue on with the post webinar kind of wrap up here. As you all see, we have a couple of webinars coming up here. We got one coming up on March 18th and all throughout April and May. To check these out and get registered, you can go to www.vitanorthamerica.com/courses and pick from whichever one you're interested in. So now it's time for a few questions. So I am going to go ahead and grab some of those. All right. So one of the first questions here is also in the design of the bar, do you zero out the fit for the zirconia substructure to fit better?
Mhm. No, so for the fit, of course, we also need a cement space. So for these big structures, because we have a big cement space or big cementing surface, we need to add more cement space than, for example, when doing a single crown. So when doing a single crown, I think the standard parameters, for example, in Exocad are 0.05 millimeters. Here, when doing a bar, I do 0.2 millimeters. So it sounds a lot, so it's 4 times that. But when having a big structure like that, you need a bigger cement space to have a good fit.
Awesome. One more question we have here is how do you remove the bar from PMMA material without destroying it? Also, if needed, how to remove bar from zirconia for repair.
Mhm. Okay, for the first question, how to remove the PMA, just with a torch, just heat it up. Of course, the PMA gets destroyed, but we don't need it anymore. And when heating the titanium, nothing is happening. So just heat it up as you would with just a frame, a partial framework. You to remove everything acrylic, you would heat it up, and you just do the same here. And how to remove the zirconia for repairing from the bar. Um, so I have to say that's why I'm using this technique. I never had to repair any zirconia or never had any fractures of the zirconia when do it in combination with the titanium bar. So I did a lot of them. I mean, of course, it's something everyone says, but that's the truth. I never had these cases returning because of a fracture. So um, maybe you have to remove them for like some color adjustments. But I mean, it's always risky to remove a big structure like that from a titanium bar because the titanium is heating up a lot and the zirconia is absorbing a lot of heat, so we can get some fractures there. So when I'm doing that, you have to heat it up really, really slowly. So just put it in the cold oven and heat it up really slowly until around 400 degrees Celsius, and that should remove the or destroy the cement.
Awesome. I believe that was our last. Oh, nope. Looks like we got one more. So one more question here. Do you score the bar for better cementation?
I don't know what you mean by score, so I believe you mean like sandblasting. So yeah, I sandblast the bar and the zirconia. No, I don't cut into it, so I don't do any extra mechanical retentions because we have a big cement surface, and I never had problems, or I never heard from anybody doing these cases that they had problems with decementation. So it's not really necessary. And for sandblasting, I just use aluminum oxide, 50 microns, and a pressure of around 3 bars. That works good. Okay, any more questions?
No, yeah, I believe that is all for now. With that being said, this is going to conclude today's webinar. If you guys did want to get in contact with Lucas, you can find his contact information here on the
Also,
screen.
one more thing.
Yeah.
We will be doing a course at the new VITA headquarters in California in June, exactly about this technique. So if you're interested, it's in June at the new VITA headquarters, the new
Yes.
training center.
Yes. Be on the lookout for information for that. We will be getting that organized and sent out to all of you very soon. So we are very excited to have Lucas at our new facility out in Brea. And yeah, we're really looking forward to getting some courses going there. But awesome. Thank you everyone for taking the time to spend with Vita Academy this morning. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Lucas, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So have a nice day, everyone.